On a cold autumn night in 1988, Officer Dave Reed, Silver Lake's most trusted cop, radioed in for the last time. Minutes later, his signal vanished, and so did he. For 15 years, the town whispered theories, runaway, revenge, or something darker. Then, a brutal drought drained Silver Lake, revealing a patrol car buried beneath the mud. Inside lay the body of a man Reed was supposed to meet the night he disappeared, and a secret that would tear the police department apart. This is the story of Officer Dave Reed, the man who tried to expose corruption and the lake that kept his secret for 15 long years. It began in Silver Lake, Oregon, with population just under 3,000, the kind of place that looked postcard perfect from the outside, where people waved even if they didn't know your name. It was the kind of town where trust wasn't just an idea, it was the law, and no one embodied that trust more than Officer Dave Reed. At 34, Dave was the town's anchor, a steady, unshakable man with calm eyes and a reputation for keeping his word. He had served on the Silver Lake Police Department for nearly a decade, working everything from speeding tickets to domestic disputes. And through it all, he carried the same quiet resolve. He wasn't a man of many words, but when he spoke, people listened. His wife Laura often said he had a way of making chaos feel like calm, even when the radio buzzed with trouble. That autumn of 1988 was colder than most. The mornings came with frost clinging to windshields, and the lake, usually busy with fishermen and campers, had gone eerily still. In the center of town, old neon signs flickered outside the diner, and the same faces filled the same booths each night: truck drivers, lumber mill workers, and the occasional state trooper passing through. It was a quiet town until it wasn't. In early October, whispers began to circle the department, small, hushed conversations that stopped when the wrong person entered the room. Dave heard them too: stories of missing paperwork, seized cars that were never logged, and a sergeant with more cash than his paycheck could explain. At first, he brushed it off as talk, the kind of gossip that lived and died in break rooms. But then an anonymous call came through dispatch, and everything changed. The voice on the other end was low, cautious, and muffled by static. He said his name was Aaron Blake, a truck driver who had been delivering parts to an old storage yard near the outskirts of town. He claimed he had proof that members of the Silver Lake PD were moving stolen vehicles through the county, cars that were supposed to be impounded, quietly disappearing onto transport trucks at night. Aaron didn't want money. He wanted protection. He said he had a folder, photos, and receipts, and he didn't trust anyone else. Dave's instincts told him to report it, to let his sergeant handle the lead like protocol demanded, but something in his gut said not to. Maybe it was the way Aaron spoke, like a man terrified of being overheard. Or maybe it was because Dave had seen the same names pop up in too many odd reports lately. Either way, he decided to meet Aaron himself, off the record, just to hear him out. He didn't tell Laura. He didn't tell his partner. He only left a note on his clipboard, a simple reminder that looked routine to anyone else, but meant something more to him. Silver Lake Road, 1 a.m. The evening of October 14th started like any other shift. Dave grabbed coffee from the diner, chatted briefly with the night cashier, and checked in over the radio at 11:47 p.m. patrol logs show he made 2 routine traffic stops, both uneventful. Then, at 1:12 a.m., he radioed in for the last time, his tone calm, his words precise, confirming he was heading towards Silver Lake Road. The dispatcher replied, but his signal broke halfway through the acknowledgement. Minutes later, his transmission cut out entirely. When the morning shift arrived, Dave's patrol car was missing, and so was he. At first, no one panicked. Officers assumed he'd gone off-grid for a call, maybe chasing a lead in the woods, maybe caught in a dead zone. But when the sun rose and his wife Laura called the station asking why he hadn't come home, the mood shifted. By noon, search parties were combing through forest roads and back trails. Helicopters swept the lake with thermal scanners. Every possible route was checked, But there was nothing. No tire tracks, no radio signal, no trace. It was as if Dave Reed had simply driven off the face of the earth. Reporters from Bend and Salem came sniffing around within days, drawn by the mystery of a clean-cut officer vanishing in a town that hadn't seen a serious crime in decades. Theories spread quickly. Maybe he discovered something he shouldn't have. Maybe he ran from something worse. Or maybe Silver Lake had secrets deeper than its waters. A week after his disappearance, Laura Reed received an unmarked envelope in her mailbox. Inside was a single photograph, grainy, overexposed, showing what looked like a patrol car parked near the lake's south edge. No note, no fingerprints, just the faint reflection of someone standing beside it. The image was later dismissed as a prank, a cruel one, but Laura never stopped believing it was real. Autumn faded into winter, and Silver Lake froze at the edges, trapping leaves beneath a skin of ice. The case went cold, and so did the town. For the next 15 years, people in Silver Lake carried the same unanswered question. What happened to Officer Dave Reed? Some said he left to escape the corruption he'd found. Others whispered that he was silenced for getting too close. But the truth was far more complicated, and it had been waiting, quietly, beneath the surface of Silver Lake all along. In the weeks following Dave Reed's disappearance, the town shifted from sympathy to suspicion. At first, everyone prayed for a rescue. But as the days stretched into silence, small inconsistencies began to surface, spreading through Silver Lake like cracks under ice. The department released official statements, calm, procedural, carefully worded, but locals could sense the unease behind them. Each briefing felt less like an update and more like a cover. Officers who once spoke freely around town now kept their heads down, their conversations clipped, their eyes avoiding questions. One by one, neighbors noticed details that didn't add up, the way patrol logs were suddenly revised, how certain reports went missing from archives, and how Sergeant Kyle Warren, Dave's direct superior, grew oddly defensive whenever the case was mentioned. He was respected, yes, but there was something about his composure, a rehearsed calm that didn't sit right with the people who'd known him for years. Laura Reed tried to stay strong. She made TV appearances, organized searches, begged for information, and kept her porch light burning every night in case Dave somehow found his way home. But quietly, she began gathering her own clues, piecing together fragments that no one else seemed to take seriously. She went through her husband's notebooks, found small scribbles and times marked beside unfamiliar names: Aaron B., 1 a.m., storage lot, no lights, keep quiet until confirmed. Each note pointed toward something bigger than a simple disappearance. That name, Aaron Blake, appeared nowhere in official records. There was no missing person report, no witness statements, no sign that anyone had ever interviewed him. It was as though the man had been erased completely. When Laura brought it up to the department, they claimed they had no knowledge of any Aaron Blake connected to Officer Reed. But a former dispatcher, who later spoke under condition of anonymity, remembered a call that night, a brief transmission from Dave referencing a meeting near the lake's south road. That note never made it into the public transcript. By mid-November, a strange tension wrapped around Silver Lake. Rumors grew darker. Some said Dave had discovered something inside the department, evidence of an internal theft ring or falsified impound reports. Others claimed he was running an undercover sting and something had gone wrong. Then came the whispers about the cars, confiscated vehicles from surrounding counties that had vanished off record, titles rewritten, VINs altered, and profits quietly funneled through fake auctions. The story might have stayed buried if not for an accident. A tow truck driver named Henry Crowley crashed his rig on a remote forest road about 10 miles outside town. While waiting for help, he noticed something odd at the base of an embankment, a wrecked pickup, rusted and stripped. Inside the glove compartment was a registration slip belonging to a car impounded by Silver Lake PD 2 years prior. one that had supposedly been transferred to county storage. It wasn't the proof anyone could take to court, but it was enough to ignite suspicion. Reporters began asking harder questions. Local papers ran stories hinting at possible internal irregularities. Anonymous letters were mailed to City Hall, warning of a cover-up. And yet, every time an investigator tried to pursue a lead, files went missing or witnesses recanted, claiming they'd misremembered. The stress began to fracture the small department. Officers transferred out, citing personal reasons. Others resigned altogether. Those who stayed closed ranks around Warren, the sergeant who'd been with the department longest and now effectively ran it. He dismissed all theories publicly, insisting that Dave's disappearance was likely voluntary, that perhaps the pressures of the job, or a hidden debt, had driven him away. But people in Silver Lake weren't buying it. Dave Reed wasn't the type to run. He'd spent 10 years serving a town that trusted him completely, a man too committed to walk away without a word. His last paycheck was unclaimed. His car loan was nearly paid off. He'd left his badge number etched on a wooden plaque for his son, along with a note reading, "Stay honest, even when it hurts." Then, a new layer of strangeness appeared. A teenage hiker exploring near the reservoir found a tattered jacket snagged on a tree root beside the shoreline. The tag inside read D. Reed, the fabric stiff with age and mud. Police dismissed it quickly, claiming it could have washed in from anywhere, but locals felt it was more than coincidence. A week later, fishermen reported seeing faint glimmers under the water, metal shapes half buried beneath the lake bed, but when divers searched, they found nothing. Still, the unease deepened. The Oregon State Police offered to step in, but Silver Lake's leadership refused assistance, claiming they had everything under control. Behind closed doors, though, tension was brewing. State-level investigators later admitted that the department's cooperation had been unusually selective, with several key officers declining formal interviews. Even the sheriff's office found itself stonewalled when requesting records. By December, the town's faith in its own police was crumbling. Silver Lake, once defined by its safety, now felt haunted. Families kept their doors locked. The diner that once buzzed with chatter turned silent whenever a patrol car passed by. People began moving away, saying the town didn't feel right anymore. Then, one night near Christmas, a local teenager named Sarah Hunt came forward claiming she'd overheard a conversation between two officers in the parking lot behind the station. She remembered one line vividly. One of them had said, "They'll never find that car as long as the lake holds." It was dismissed as rumor, the words of a frightened girl desperate for attention, but it lingered in the community like smoke after a fire. No one could prove what happened to Officer Dave Reed that autumn night, but for 15 years, those quiet suspicions never went away. They would drift between generations, whispered from porch to porch, until the day Silver Lake began to dry, and its secrets finally surfaced. The night of October 14th, 1988, began like any other for Officer Dave Reed, but in hindsight, the smallest details took on new meaning. The crisp air, the thin fog curling off Silver Lake, the faint hum of his patrol engine echoing through the Pine Valley. He was seen last leaving the station, his headlights cutting through the quiet roads of town, passing the diner, the lumber yard, and the gas station where a young attendant would later swear he saw Reed glance once in his direction, almost as if to confirm the world was still steady before stepping into the unknown. According to dispatch records, he checked in shortly after 1 a.m., his final radio call calm and routine, saying only that he was heading down toward the South Road. Then silence. No distress signal. No static burst. Just an empty channel that would haunt the department for years. What investigators later pieced together came not from immediate evidence, but from small, stubborn fragments, bits of tire impressions found weeks later, eyewitness statements that contradicted each other, and a single torn piece of uniform fabric lodged in a root near the waterline. Together, they painted a picture of a meeting that was never meant to end peacefully. Aaron Blake had been waiting near the lake's edge, if the call logs were true. His truck was found days later abandoned off a forest route, its keys still in the ignition, one window shattered. No fingerprints, no signs of a struggle, just emptiness, as though he had stepped out and dissolved into the fog. He was the kind of man the town barely noticed. Divorced, quiet, living out of his truck between long-haul jobs. But in that brief connection with Reed, he became the final thread of a story that would unravel everything. Investigators theorized that Dave arrived at the meeting point shortly after 1, headlights sweeping over the gravel pull-off, engine idling as he looked for Blake. The area was secluded, surrounded by tall pines and brush, the kind of place sound didn't carry far. What happened next can only be reconstructed by inference, by the cold logic of crime scene evidence, and what came after. The second set of tire tracks, deeper, heavier, belonged to a sedan registered under Sergeant Kyle Warren's name, though at the time that detail went unnoticed. Witnesses later recalled hearing what they thought were fireworks echoing across the lake around 1:30 a.m., two sharp cracks carried by the wind. None of them reported it then. In Silver Lake, people didn't imagine gunfire coming from one of their own. It's believed that Warren confronted Reed at the meeting point, having intercepted the tip about Blake's evidence. Whether he followed Dave out of fear or premeditation remains unclear, but the confrontation turned violent. One of the recovered shell casings matched the type issued to department officers, though by the time the car was recovered 15 years later, the proof was buried in mud and time. What's chilling is how quickly the aftermath was contained. Within hours, the department's internal radio logs were edited, with a timestamped gap between 1:10 and 1:40 a.m. No one ever explained the missing record. That gap erased the moment Dave's patrol car slid toward the lake, the wheels churning mud before it finally broke through the embankment and sank beneath the surface. The lake was deep that year, swollen from heavy rains, and the car descended fast, the cabin filling within seconds. Mud and silt sealed the doors, swallowing it whole. For 15 years, it stayed hidden, preserved in the dark like a secret the town didn't dare unearth. No one saw Warren return that night. He clocked in the next morning at 8 a.m., composed, quiet, acting as though nothing had happened. When asked about Dave's whereabouts, he expressed concern, offered to lead the search, and did, carefully directing crews away from the South Shore. Later forensic reanalysis of the car's recovered interior told a more chilling story. Two sets of remains were found, one belonging to Aaron Blake, wrists bound with nylon cord. The passenger door bore dents from inside, shallow but desperate. No trace of Dave Reed's body was found. Only his badge, tarnished and resting on the dashboard as if placed there. Whether Reed died that night or met another fate is something no one can say with certainty. Some believed Warren shot him and sank both cars to erase the evidence. Others thought Reed tried to fight back, only for both men to vanish in the chaos. The truth, like the lake itself, was murky, and for 15 years, all Silver Lake had were ripples, small distortions on the surface, hinting at something terrible beneath. When the drought of 2003 hit Silver Lake, the locals prayed for rain, but what surfaced from the receding water would change the town forever. The muddy lakebed cracked and split, releasing a sour stench that carried across the valley. Fishermen first spotted the glint of metal, thinking it was an old boat or debris from the 60s logging days. But as the sheriff's office arrived and the mud was cleared, the outline of a patrol car began to emerge, its lights long dead, its insignia barely visible under layers of algae and decay. The discovery was like opening a time capsule sealed by violence. Officer Dave Reed's long-missing cruiser, entombed beneath 15 years of silence. The retrieval took 2 days, chains digging into the softened earth, the tow line groaning as the vehicle broke the surface like a ghost. Inside, the waterlogged interior was a time warp. Handcuffs rusted to the dash, a flashlight still clipped to the door, the faint trace of a badge glimmering under the film of silt. When they pried open the passenger side, they found what would become the case's second mystery: skeletal remains, wrists bound, skull fractured. The coroner later confirmed it was Aaron Blake, the man Reed was supposed to meet the night he vanished. From the start, the discovery sent shockwaves through the town. Silver Lake's image as a quiet, forgotten place, where everyone knew everyone, was shattered overnight. News crews arrived, reporters staked out by the pier, and the State Bureau was forced to reopen the missing persons case they'd quietly shelved years ago. Sheriff Marla Denson, who had just taken office the previous year, was suddenly responsible for unraveling a 15-year-old disappearance that implicated her own department's past. The investigation began with the car itself. Forensic teams drained what remained of the waterlogged trunk and found 2 bullets lodged in the rear seat frame, the same caliber issued to police officers in the late 80s. The serial numbers had been deliberately filed off. The driver's seat belt was latched, but the seat was empty, no sign of Reed. What they did find, however, was a tarnished badge on the dashboard, perfectly centered, as if intentionally placed, and an evidence envelope tucked beneath the floor mat, its contents nearly destroyed by water damage. What little survived hinted at something Reed might have been working on before his disappearance. A series of photocopied internal memos, names of officers, and payment receipts connected to protective assignments around town, none of which were part of any official budget. Those documents became the first thread in a web of corruption Reed had apparently been tracing before he vanished. It turned out that the Silver Lake Police Department of the late 80s had more shadows than anyone cared to admit. Several officers had quietly resigned in the months after his disappearance, including Sergeant Kyle Warren, who relocated to Idaho and lived under a new name. For years, his transfer had been treated as unrelated, but the resurfaced car changed everything. When state investigators questioned Warren in 2003, his account was unsettlingly composed. He claimed he hadn't seen Reed that night and had been home with his wife. She had since passed away, leaving no one to confirm or deny his story. Still, the tone of his interview raised alarms. He spoke of Reed with a strange detachment, calling him too idealistic for small-town policing. Weeks later, before a warrant could be issued for further questioning, Warren was found dead in his garage, an apparent suicide. The note left behind was brief. He shouldn't have gone to the lake. The case, which had lain dormant for 15 years, now spiraled into something darker. Forensic reanalysis of Warren's service weapon, still on record, revealed a ballistic match to the shell casings retrieved from Reed's submerged cruiser. What was once rumor was now evidence. Reed had been killed by one of their own. But the question was why. The deeper investigators dug, the more rot they unearthed. It seemed Reed had stumbled upon an internal network that extended beyond the department, a pipeline between certain officers and local contractors who used police connections to move stolen construction equipment across state lines. Reed had likely discovered this through Blake, a truck driver who unknowingly transported the stolen goods. When Blake threatened to expose the operation, he became expendable, and Reed, bound by duty but unaware of the danger, walked straight into a trap set by the very men he trusted. What haunted investigators most was what they found at Reed's home after the car resurfaced. Hidden behind a false panel in his basement was a small box containing microcassette tapes labeled with dates and initials. The recordings were damaged but partially recoverable. In one, Reed spoke into the recorder late at night, his voice tired but firm. "If anything happens to me, it's not random. They're watching. They know I'm close." The last tape ended abruptly, the sound of a door creaking and then silence. Forensic teams compared handwriting samples from the recovered memos and confirmed Reed's annotations, names of officers, dollar amounts, and one recurring entry. KW, drop at Lake, Tuesday. The initials match Kyle Warren. That simple notation, scrawled in fading ink, tied the entire conspiracy together. The case widened beyond the lake. Financial audits revealed decades of falsified overtime logs and missing evidence reports, all pointing back to the same era. Every new revelation tarnished the department's reputation further. The town that once idolized its police now looked at them with suspicion, and whispers turned into accusations. Retired officers refused interviews, and one, when confronted by journalists, muttered only, "You dig too deep in Silver Lake, you drown." Yet, one mystery remained unsolved. What happened to Dave Reed's body? Divers combed the lake again, extending the search radius by half a mile, but found nothing. It was as though he had vanished into thin air. But then, 6 months after the discovery of the cruiser, a local hiker reported finding a half-buried bone fragment near the riverbank downstream from Silver Lake. DNA testing confirmed it was Reed's. The bone bore a single clean fracture consistent with blunt force trauma. It wasn't the lake that killed him. It was the men who feared what he might expose. The revelation brought the investigation full circle. Warren's death, once viewed as guilt-driven suicide, was re-examined after an anonymous letter was mailed to Sheriff Denson. It contained no signature, only a single typed line. Warren didn't act alone. Inside the envelope was a Polaroid, grainy, discolored, showing 3 men standing near a truck by the lake in 1988. One of them was clearly Warren. Another matched a former deputy who'd since retired to Florida. The third remained unidentified. That photo reopened the wound all over again, suggesting that the corruption extended even deeper than anyone realized. The unidentified man was never found, but locals whispered theories that he'd been part of a federal task force gone rogue, or that he disappeared under a new identity long before the lake gave up its secrets. By the time the state closed the investigation in 2005, the official conclusion was partial justice at best. Aaron Blake, murdered. Dave Reed, killed in the line of duty. Kyle Warren, primary suspect, deceased. But for the people of Silver Lake, those neat summaries felt hollow, like trying to contain a storm in a bottle. The truth had leaked through the cracks, evidence of betrayal, silenced voices, and a system that protected itself until nature intervened. Even years later, when the lake filled again and the surface turned mirror still, locals swore the water never looked the same. On certain autumn nights, when the fog rolled low and the wind carried just right, some said they could still see faint blue lights flickering beneath the surface, like a patrol car trying to call home. When the investigation finally concluded in late 2005, Silver Lake was never the same. What had once been a quiet mountain town known for its fishing docks and summer fairs became synonymous with betrayal and silence. The headlines that once drew national attention slowly faded, but the wound in the community never healed. The police department underwent a massive restructuring, several officers dismissed, others quietly resigning before internal affairs could reach them. Yet the stain remained, invisible but permanent, a reminder that justice could be delayed, buried, and distorted, but never fully erased. The state erected a modest memorial in front of the new police station, a bronze plaque bearing the name Officer David Reed, end of watch. October 14, 1988. Flowers appeared often at its base, some from strangers, others anonymous. Sheriff Denson made it her duty to visit every year on that same date, standing silently before the plaque as though waiting for it to speak, to confess the things the case files never could. The department's slogan, "Once serve and protect," was quietly changed to "Honor through truth," a gesture that rang hollow to many, especially those who had lived through the years of whispered deceit. The aftermath stretched far beyond symbolism. The Blake family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the county, uncovering more internal records in the process, documents suggesting that Reed had filed multiple reports about corruption months before his disappearance, only for them to be signed off and buried by his superiors. The civil suit forced those records into public view, exposing the old hierarchy that had long since fled or retired. It became clear that Reed had not been a reckless officer, but a man who understood the danger and faced it anyway, fully aware he was walking into something bigger than himself. But the town's conscience didn't rest easily. In 2006, two local teenagers exploring the old quarry found a half-buried lockbox containing more of Reed's cassette tapes, the labels too faded to read. Forensic audio teams cleaned and restored the recordings, revealing new fragments that cast the past in a darker light. On one tape, dated October 12, 1988, 2 days before his disappearance, Reed spoke in a low, deliberate tone. "If I can't get this through to the state, I'll hand it to Blake at the lake." He says he has proof, names, dates. Warren's involved, but I think someone higher is pulling the strings. The tape reignited public outrage. If someone higher had been orchestrating the cover-up, who was it? Theories exploded online. Some claimed a former county commissioner had ties to the smuggling ring. Others pointed to a retired state investigator who'd quietly relocated months after Reed vanished. None of these were ever proven, but the pattern was clear. The corruption wasn't isolated to Silver Lake. It was systemic. Reed had stumbled onto a thread that, if pulled, could have unraveled far more than anyone wanted exposed. By 2007, interest in the case had evolved into obsession. Documentaries, podcasts, and amateur sleuth groups dissected every inch of the timeline. Divers continued to return to the lake, hoping to find what the official reports missed. Some claimed Reed's gun was still down there, waiting to be found. Others swore the missing pieces, the missing people, were buried in the woods surrounding the South Road. Even the tourists who visited out of curiosity felt an eerie presence near the water, as if the air itself remembered. The families of both Reed and Blake eventually left Silver Lake, unable to bear the constant reminder. Reed's sister, before leaving town, said in one interview, "They think the lake kept his secret, but maybe it was keeping their guilt." Her words lingered in the public consciousness like an accusation no one could answer. Years later, when drought struck again and the waterline receded, people watched the exposed mud with dread, wondering what else might surface. And on a quiet morning in 2012, a local fisherman reported seeing a metallic glint near the shallows. A revolver, half buried, its serial number filed off. Ballistics linked it to Warren's gun. It was the last physical trace of the night that started everything. The case was closed again soon after, officially sealed and archived, but no one in Silver Lake believed that was the end. The town carried its silence like a scar, the water reflecting not peace, but memory. Some nights, the fog rolled over the surface so thick it looked like the lake was trying to breathe, exhaling decades of lies. And beneath that mist, under the stillness and the history, there was always the sense that Officer Dave Reed's story wasn't finished, that somewhere in the dark, the truth was still waiting to rise. Some stories end with answers. Others, like Officer Dave Reed's, end with echoes. Silver Lake may have given up its secrets, but the deeper truth, why good men fall, why silence protects the guilty, still lingers in the fog that curls over the water each night. Reed stood for integrity in a place that forgot what that meant, and in his disappearance, he exposed the quiet cost of courage. The files may be closed, the guilty long punished, but the questions remain. How many more stories lie buried under small-town lakes and long-forgotten case files? How often does truth drown because those meant to guard it turn away? Maybe the real weight of this story isn't the crime. It's the choice every person faces when right and wrong no longer look so clear. Reed made his choice, and the lake kept it. But justice, like water, always finds a way back to the surface. So as you leave this story behind, ask yourself, what would you risk to bring truth to light? And how long could you live with what you chose to hide? If this story moved you, subscribe to Last Clue, where every truth, no matter how buried, eventually resurfaces.